Hello and welcome back to Explaining Acro. I'm Ben and this is Cassandra, and today we're going to be talking about the three components that we look for in a hand-to-hand grip. In standing acrobatics, there is probably nothing that is more ubiquitous than the hand-to-hand grip. It is quite literally the handshake of our entire discipline. Now, people have lots of opinions on what makes a good grip, and there's a ton of individual variation. Today, we're hoping to demystify a little bit of that for you. We're going to talk about what we view as the non-negotiables of good technique when it comes to hand-to-hand grip, and then all the little ways that you might go about developing the grip that works best for your anatomy and your partnership. The first thing that we want to talk about is wrist angle. Now, when we talk about wrist angle, what we're referring to is the angle that is formed between the hand and this imaginary line that is at the base of the hand or the end of the bones of the forearm. Now, in general, we're looking for something that is about 45 degrees. If the grip gets too steep or too flat, we can run into problems. Now, as we get steeper, the bones of the forearms of the base and the flyer become more aligned. And in general, that's desirable. What that does is it allows us to use less muscular strength and rely more on pure alignment for that balance and for force transmission. Now, if we get too steep, what's going to happen is that we're going to have a little bit less surface area and the weight is going to be more concentrated, and the flyer is going to tend to actually slip off once we get to a certain amount of steepness, which isn't good for anyone involved. Another thing that can happen when the grip gets too steep, short of the flyer falling entirely off of the base, is that you can kind of get this thumb to thumb contact where the webbing of the thumb is pushing into the webbing of the thumb and you're really only being held on by that point of contact. So if you're feeling that, your grip might be a little bit too steep and you might want to go just a little bit flatter to find something that's comfortable. Now, in practice, we don't really see people being too steep, but we do see a ton of people being too flat. Now, this can cause some pretty serious problems. What's going on is that as we get flatter, there becomes more horizontal distance between the base's arm and the flyer's arm. Now, that horizontal distance we then need to make up for by using the strength of our wrists and our forearms in order to ensure that we're transmitting force smoothly between base and flyer. Now, even if we aren't doing dynamic tricks, this can still lead to a lot of fatigue and strain and potentially repetitive stress injuries. When it comes to more dynamic skills, what happens is the amount of force that we're able to transmit from base to flyer is limited by the amount of force that the muscles of the wrist of the base or the flyer is able to transmit smoothly without kind of wobbling and dispersing energy in all sorts of different directions, and again, potentially leading to injury.
A common mistake we see when it comes to wrist angle in bases and flyers is trying to balance the handstand by revving or moving our hands. And this is often seen when jumping into hand-to-hand, at least in my own practice. And by revving our hands, there's a few things that happen. First is it can be unpredictable and scary because now our weight is moving quicker than anticipated, and we might even lose the connection in the hand-to-hand grip, which is our main form of communication here. Additionally, it's not the most efficient way of moving. Our wrists are not strong enough to make these adjustments long-term and can result in chronic injuries or stress injuries. So instead, what we think about is locking the wrist into a strong position, and then we're making minor movements and adjustments with our fingers and our alignment of our hand-to-hand.
The second thing that we want to talk about is the actual point of contact between our hands. Now, in general, we want to maximize the area of this contact. And in order to do that, we can do a few things. So I like to start with this hand with the fingers spread out. Now, we don't want to be spread super tight because this actually causes the muscles and the skin of the palm of the hand to become tight. And then you have these little bits of gaps between the hands. By spreading the fingers but allowing a little bit of softness, the skin should be slightly soft to the touch, maybe like a medium rare steak or something like that. And then you're able to push the hands into each other and allow the hands to conform to their individual shape. Once we have this solid connection without the fingers, then we can start to talk about getting the fingers involved. Now, hand-to-hand is a little bit different than basically anything else that you've learned in your life when it comes to actually grabbing things. So all primates, and in particular humans, have what we'd call this grasping reflex when we're infants. So if you like put a hand or an object in a baby's hand, they're going to curl their hand around it. And in particular, this thumb is going to kind of come around and help cup the object. Now, if I'm holding someone's hand like this, what this is doing is it's creating this kind of tripod, and there's going to be all of this area of gap here. So we really want to focus on maintaining that open hand as we have that contact. And then this thumb is just coming around kind of the side and giving like this little side hug type of thing. Kind of the canonical grip involves 2 fingers down the wrist. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I'm thinking about just kind of using my pinky and ring finger a little bit to pull that thumb in while again not crunching the hand. And then these fingers are really just supporting while making sure to keep that contact through these knuckles.
One of the most common things that I see when doing hand-to-hand and practicing this grip with other bases is the pinching of the hand. And as a flyer, there's a few reasons that I really cue more of this open hand and getting as much surface area as possible. One is that we are balancing on this platform. If it's pinched, we're losing a lot of that support and that connection to our base. So now instead of balancing on a flat surface that we're more used to, we're now balancing on just a few points and have this big gap in the middle of our hand, which can feel unpredictable and not the most comfortable, and can also result in different wrist injuries and hand problems. If you find that the grip is challenging and there's still kind of this pinching and you're not getting as much surface area as you'd like, there's a few drills you can practice. One of our favorites is just by doing a hand-to-hand grip or doing a hand-to-hand itself. And you can remove the fingers, either the bases or the flyers, or both of you can remove your fingers from the grip. And in that, you can see how balanced it is and how well of a connection you have. Because ideally, you should be able to balance that without needing the fingers or the gripping.
The final thing that we want to talk about is the quality of contact with the fingers themselves. Now, this is where there's a ton of opportunity for individual variation depending on your anatomy relative to your partner, and what trick you're doing specifically. Everything we've talked about so far in terms of wrist angle and surface area, we think should be pretty consistent, kind of regardless of who you are and what's going on in your partnership, and we look for immediately upon working with new people. Now, there still are some things that we think are constant when it comes to the fingers. So we already talked about what the thumb is doing, but I also like to talk about kind of this pinky and ring finger. Now, with these as well, you don't want to be kind of pinching. You want to be doing this kind of side hug thing. Now, the index and middle finger end up doing all sorts of different things. The first thing I want to talk about is what they're doing along the wrist. Now, in general, I've noticed that some amount of bend is better than straight fingers, both in terms of like muscular recruitment and being able to like really impart force, but also in terms of like long-term joint health and finger health and things like that. Now, there are 2 kind of schools of thought when it comes to what these fingers are doing that I've seen. So school of thought number 1 is what we call the snake bite, where the fingers are kind of pulling towards the base of the wrist and maybe thinking about like pulling the hand towards you or something like that. The other thought is to think about pushing directly into the wrist. Now, I am a fan of pushing directly into the wrist for a couple of reasons. Reason number 1 is if I actually want to control the balance, if the flyer is like underbalanced or something like that, I want to counter it as efficiently as possible. If I am pushing directly back into it, then all of my force is going directly into the wrist. If I'm pulling down and maybe pushing a little bit or something like that, my force is kind of split between going down, pushing into the flyer and down, and so I'm able to resist the flyer less well. Additionally, as I'm pulling down like that, I have a shorter lever. So my force is a function of both how long my lever is as well as the direction of the force. So by maximizing the length of my lever and the direction of my force, I'm able to control the flyer better. Kind of regardless of what I'm doing with my index and middle finger, I am thinking about holding on pretty tightly. I'm gripping my flyer strongly. I want to be able to really move kind of the entire line forwards and backwards in space if I need to. And if that grip isn't really there, you have to move a lot slower. Cassie talked about like practicing with an open hand, which I think is absolutely great. But once we start to add these fingers, we're able to make quicker adjustments, which can be really helpful as we're doing dynamic moves. When it comes to the number of fingers down the base's wrists, kind of the thing that you've likely been taught and what I consider to be kind of the canonical or like, kind of stereotypical answer is to just have 2 fingers down the flyer's wrist. And I think that works fine a lot of the time. If it feels great for you, keep doing it, awesome. The other thing that I see is kind of having just the middle finger on the flyer's wrist, and that index finger is going to be coming around kind of to their base of their pinky. This can be something that works for some people as well. So I don't have a lot of active pronation in my wrist, and this can make flyers tend to be in this little bit of like bulldog handstand type position. By rotating a little bit extra and like anchoring my finger on the flyer's wrist there, I'm able to get a little bit of extra rotation, and that helps the flyer be in a good position. The other advantage of this like hook grip around the hand like this is it's something that you can actually use for tricks like drag ups or cannonballs or entrances or exits where the flyer is coming in front of you. If I have 2 fingers and the flyer is falling down there, I'm really only holding on with my ring finger and pinky finger, and that grip can kind of become unlatched. By having this extra finger on the other side, we can be upside down, pull and flip it, and it works. Now, for those tricks, you might also see something like you have almost 2 fingers on the other side of the wrist to get an even better latch, but I find that you can get the job done with just 1. One final consideration I'm going to give you is if you are a flyer on a base with large wrists, or you are a base with large wrists who works with a lot of smaller flyers, sometimes you can put 3 fingers down the base's wrist as you are flying. What this does is very similarly, it can just let you have your wrists be nice and forward and you don't have that torque. If the base's wrists are super wide and you're trying to get like your ring finger around that, oftentimes you can get a lot of rotation on your wrist that just doesn't feel comfortable in the long run.
In hand-to-hand grip flyers, I'm really thinking about these front fingers pushing into the base's wrist. I am using them quite a bit and getting into the front of my hand as much as possible to where if those fingers were removed, I would fall over. And what this is doing is really creating and generating the stability and tension between our grip.
Now that we've talked about the 3 components that we think make up a good hand-to-hand grip, let's talk about how you really find something that feels good for you and your partner. Now, the most important thing is that you're able to communicate effectively about what's going on. So for that, we're going to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the hand. So this is the heel, this is the knuckles, this is the outside, this is the inside. So to start with this drill, I'm going to put my arm out straight at this 45-degree angle with an open hand, and my partner's going to do the same. From here, we're going to push into each other and really think about where our hand might not feel supported. So in this case, I might ask for Cassie to push through her inside knuckle in order to give me a little bit of support. Now, it went a little bit too steep, so I'll say, hey, a little less steep, and then we end up in a pretty good spot. From here, we can add our fingers and really lock in that grip. A little bit more push in the fingers. Yep, bend your fingers a little bit. Yeah, and push. Nice. And this is something that we can do not only in this drill, but also in our hand-to-hand or really at any point that we're working on our grip. We can use this language to communicate about where we want to push through our hands and really strive to improve the grip. We hope that you found the video today helpful in helping you better understand the hand-to-hand grip and hopefully giving you some things that you can take into your own practice. Incorporating this into your warm-ups and drills and just calibrating new partnerships, particularly by practicing without using your fingers, can be a really effective way to level up your practice. If you found these tips helpful, you might like this video we did in the past where we covered 5 tips to improve your hand-to-hand. We'll have a link for that in the description. If you enjoyed this video or any of our videos in general, we'd really appreciate it if you liked this video, shared with your community, and subscribe to the channel. All of this really gives us the motivation that we need to keep putting out content for you every single week. Till next time.